The final hour, the crimson sun of Xerion Prime cast its dying light across a battlefield that stretched beyond the horizon, where the twisted remains of starships jutted from scarred earth like metallic tombstones. The air hung thick with smoke and the acrid smell of burned plasma, while overhead, the skeletal frames of destroyed orbital platforms drifted silently through space like ghosts of humanity's former glory. Commander Sarah Chen stood atop the command bunker's observation deck, her weathered hands gripping the railing as she surveyed the devastation below. The wind whipped her dark hair across her face, but her eyes remained fixed on the distant shimmer of the Dominion fleet massing beyond the planet's outer defense grid. In 12 hours, they would come. In 12 hours, everything would end, one way or another. Commander, Lieutenant Torres's voice crackled through her comm unit, strain evident in every syllable. The final refugee transports have cleared the system. We're down to combat personnel only. Sarah closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of every soul they'd failed to save pressing down on her shoulders like a physical burden. Acknowledged, Torres. Send word to all unit commanders, final briefing in 20 minutes. Behind her, the bunker hummed with desperate activity as technicians worked to repair damaged systems and soldiers checked their weapons with the methodical precision of those who knew they might not see another sunrise. These were the last of humanity's fighting force, broken, scarred, but not defeated. Veterans of a dozen lost worlds, survivors of the siege of Terra Nova, rebels who had clawed their way through 3 years of unrelenting warfare against an enemy that showed no mercy and accepted no surrender. The war with the Dominion had consumed everything. Entire star systems had been reduced to lifeless husks, their populations either enslaved or exterminated with the cold efficiency of a species that viewed humanity as nothing more than an infestation to be eradicated. The Dominion's biomechanical fleets had swept across the galaxy like a plague, their adaptive technologies learning from each battle, growing stronger with every victory. But here, on this forsaken world at the edge of known space, humanity would make its final stand. Not because they had chosen this battlefield, but because they had nowhere left to run. Sarah turned from the railing and strode through the bunker's corridors, past wounded soldiers who looked up at her with eyes that held both hope and resignation. In the main briefing chamber, the assembled commanders represented the fractured remnants of a dozen different factions, regular military, colonial defense forces, mercenary crews, and rebel cells that had spent years fighting in the shadows. Under normal circumstances, these groups would have been as likely to fight each other as work together. But the Dominion had a way of creating strange bedfellows. Captain Marcus Webb of the destroyer Defiant sat alongside Zaravas, the notorious pirate whose raiders had been terrorizing Dominion supply lines for months. Colonel Rivera from the Martian Defense Corps shared tactical data with Dr. Elena Vasquez, whose underground resistance network had helped evacuate millions of civilians from doomed worlds. And in the corner, silent and imposing, stood Ambassador Thekvar of the Kalani Republic, one of the few alien species to openly defy the Dominion's expansion. "Friends," Sarah began, her voice carrying across the hushed chamber, "I won't insult your intelligence with false hope or empty promises. The enemy fleet outnumbers us 3-1. Their ships are faster, better armed, and supported by ground forces that could level a city in minutes." She paused, meeting each pair of eyes in turn. "But they have one weakness we can exploit, they believe we're already beaten." A bitter laugh escaped Captain Webb's lips. "Can you blame them? We've got 18 ships, most of them held together with prayer and scrap metal, facing down the largest Dominion battle group ever assembled. By all rights, we should be running. And go where?" Zara's voice cut through the air like a blade. "There is nowhere left to run, Captain. They've taken everything else. This isn't just humanity's last stand, it's the galaxy's last chance to prove that freedom is worth fighting for." Ambassador Thekvar's translated voice resonated through his universal communicator with an otherworldly echo. "The Kalani have a saying, when the last tree falls, only then do we see the forest clearly. We have fought the Dominion separately, and we have all failed. But perhaps, in our shared desperation, we might find strength." Colonel Rivera leaned forward, studying the holographic display that showed the approaching enemy fleet in stark detail. Their formation suggests they're planning a standard orbital bombardment followed by ground assault. They want to make an example of this world, show the galaxy what happens to those who resist. Then we'll give them a different kind of example, Sarah replied, her fingers dancing across the control panel to highlight key positions on the tactical map. Operation Phoenix isn't about winning a conventional battle. It's about proving that even when everything seems lost, the human spirit can still burn bright enough to light the darkness. The plan was desperate, perhaps even suicidal, but it was their only chance. Using the planet's unique crystalline geology, they would channel the energy from the Dominion's initial bombardment through underground resonance chambers, creating a feedback pulse that would temporarily disable the enemy's shield generators. In that narrow window of vulnerability, every ship they had would launch a coordinated strike at the Dominion flagship, a massive dreadnought called the Terminus that served as both command center and symbol of their enemy's might. The key is timing, Dr. Vasquez explained, her scientific background making her invaluable in planning the technical aspects of their assault. If we trigger the pulse too early or too late, the entire plan fails. And we'll only get one shot. One shot is all we need, Sarah said with a conviction she didn't entirely feel. Everyone knows their role. Everyone understands the stakes. In 8 hours, when their fleet arrives, we show them that humanity doesn't go quietly into the night. As the commanders dispersed to make final preparations, Sarah found herself alone with her thoughts for the first time in days. She made her way to the communications center, where a single message beacon waited to transmit her final report to any surviving human colonies beyond the war zone. Her hands hovered over the keyboard for a long moment before she began to type, asterisk to whoever receives this transmission, we are the last guardians of a dream that began when humanity first looked up at the stars and wondered what lay beyond. The Dominion believes they can extinguish that dream, reduce us to nothing more than a footnote in their empire's history. They are wrong. Today, we prove that freedom is not something to be given or taken, it is something that lives in the hearts of all sentient beings, and it cannot be destroyed by weapons or conquered by force. Remember us not as the last of the old galaxy, but as the first to show that a new one is possible, asterisk the hours that followed passed in a blur of final preparations, last-minute equipment checks, and quiet moments of reflection. Soldiers wrote letters they hoped would never be found, engineers performed miracles to coax a few more hours of life from damaged systems, and commanders made peace with decisions that would haunt them for whatever time they had left. As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that reminded Sarah of Earth's sunsets, Earth, which had fallen to the Dominion 2 years ago, the first signs of the enemy fleet appeared as pinpricks of light against the darkening stars. Lieutenant Torres appeared at her side, his young face aged beyond its years by the weight of war. Commander, all units report ready. The resonance chambers are charged and waiting. We're as prepared as we'll ever be. Sarah nodded, taking one last look at the world they were about to defend, not because it was paradise, but because it was all they had left. Signal all ships. This is it, people. For Earth. For Mars. For every world that burned and every life that was lost. Today, we remind the galaxy what it means to be human. The enemy fleet descended like a storm of steel and fire, their ships blotting out the stars as they assumed attack formation above the planet's atmosphere. The Dominion had brought everything, battle cruisers bristling with energy weapons, carrier vessels disgorging swarms of fighters, and at the center of it all, the Terminus, a kilometer-long monument to their empire's power. The bombardment began at exactly 0300 hours, as predicted. Columns of superheated plasma lanced down from orbit, turning sections of the planet's surface into molten glass. But instead of destroying the human defenses, the energy was absorbed, channeled, and redirected through Dr. Vasquez's ingenious network of crystalline conduits. Resonance at 40% and climbing, she reported from her position deep in the underground complex. 50%, 60%, we're approaching critical mass. Above ground, the combined human fleet launched from concealed positions, their engines blazing against the night sky as they rose to meet the Dominion armada. 18 ships against nearly 60, but Sarah had learned long ago that numbers didn't tell the whole story. The first phase of the battle was chaos incarnate. Human fighters darted between the massive Dominion vessels like angry insects, their pilots pushing their craft to the very limits of endurance. The Defiance took a direct hit from a Dominion cruiser and began venting atmosphere, but Captain Webb managed to ram his crippled ship into the enemy's weapon batteries, taking both vessels out of the fight. Zara's Raider squadron used hit-and-run tactics that would have made ancient Earth pirates proud, striking at vulnerable points before vanishing into the debris field that surrounded the planet. But for every small victory, the humans paid a terrible price. Ships that had survived dozens of battles were reduced to scrap in seconds, their crews dying as heroes whose names would never be remembered. Resonance at 90%. Dr. Vasquez's voice crackled through the comm system as explosions shook the underground facility. Almost there. The Terminus had noticed the unusual energy readings and was adjusting its position, trying to get a clear shot at the resonance chambers. Sarah watched the tactical display with growing dread as the massive dreadnought's main weapons began to swivel toward the planet's surface. "All remaining ships, form up on me," she commanded, her own vessel, the light cruiser Phoenix, accelerating toward the enemy flagship. "We need to buy Elena more time." What followed was the most desperate few minutes of Sarah's life. The remaining human vessels threw themselves at the Terminus with suicidal determination, their weapons barely scratching its armored hull but succeeding in drawing its attention away from the planet. Colonel Rivera's ground forces fired everything they had at the enemy fighters strafing their positions, while Ambassador Thekvar's ship, a sleek Kalani design, danced through the battle with impossible grace, its exotic weapons carving through Dominion shields like paper. 100%. Dr. Vasquez screamed. "Firing now." The pulse that erupted from Zirian Prime's surface was visible across the entire star system, a wave of energy that washed over the Dominion fleet like a tsunami of raw power. For 30 seconds, every enemy shield generator went dark, leaving their ships vulnerable for the first time in the entire war. "All ships, target the Terminus," Sarah commanded. "Everything we have, right now." The concentrated firepower of humanity's last fleet struck the Dominion flagship like the fist of an angry god. Torpedoes designed to crack planetary armor punched through hull plating that had never been breached. Energy beams that could melt asteroids carved deep wounds in the ship's superstructure. And at the center of it all, Sarah's Phoenix dove straight toward the Dreadnought's command section, her ship's core overloading in preparation for one final, desperate gambit. In the last seconds before impact, Sarah found herself thinking not of the battles lost or the worlds that had burned, but of a small cafe on Earth where she'd shared coffee with her sister on the morning before joining the fleet. She thought of children's laughter in the parks of New Geneva, of lovers walking hand in hand beneath the twin moons of Kepler's world, of all the small, perfect moments that made life worth living. The Phoenix struck the Terminus at full velocity, her overloading reactor core detonating in a fireball that could be seen from the planet's surface. The explosion tore through the Dominion flagship's command structure, killing its leadership and crippling its ability to coordinate the fleet. But Sarah Chen did not die in that explosion. By some miracle of engineering and luck, her escape pod had ejected milliseconds before impact, carrying her clear of the destruction. She floated in the void, watching as the remaining Dominion ships, leaderless and confused, began to fall back from the battle. It wasn't victory in any traditional sense. Both fleets had been decimated, the planet's surface was scarred beyond recognition, and the cost in lives was almost impossible to comprehend. But as Sarah watched the enemy retreat, she realized something profound had changed. For the first time in 3 years, the Dominion had been forced to withdraw. For the first time since the war began, they had shown that they could be beaten. The rescue shuttles found her 6 hours later, floating in the debris field that had once been 2 mighty fleets. When they pulled her aboard, the first thing she saw was Lieutenant Torres's face, streaked with tears and soot but alive, miraculously, impossibly alive. "Commander," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Initial reports from the outer colonies. The Dominion fleets are pulling back across a dozen sectors. They're actually retreating." Sarah closed her eyes and felt something she hadn't experienced in years, hope. Not the desperate, grasping hope of the dying, but the quiet, steady hope of those who had seen the worst and survived to fight another day. The battle for Zirion Prime was over, but the war was far from won. There would be more fighting, more sacrifices, more worlds that would burn before peace could be restored to the galaxy. But in the wreckage of a forgotten world at the edge of known space, humanity had proven something that no amount of firepower could destroy, that freedom was worth fighting for, no matter the cost. As the surviving ships formed up for the long journey to the rally point at Kepler Station, Sarah composed another message to broadcast across the human colonies: the night is ending. Dawn comes not because the darkness chooses to retreat, but because we choose to kindle flames in the void. We are bloodied but not broken. We are few, but we are free. And we will keep fighting until every star in the sky knows what it means to live without fear. In the years that followed, historians would call it the Battle of Zirion Prime, the turning point of the Dominion War, the moment when humanity's long retreat finally stopped and the counterattack began. But to those who were there, it would always be remembered as something simpler and more profound, the day they proved that even in the darkest hour, hope could still burn bright enough to light the way home. Yet as the human fleet disappeared into hyperspace, carrying with them the seeds of a new rebellion, sensors deep in the galactic core detected something troubling. The Dominion's retreat was not a sign of defeat, but regrouping. In the dark spaces between stars, something ancient was stirring, something that made the Dominion's biomechanical horrors seem almost benign by comparison. The battle for the galaxy had been won, but the war for its soul was only just beginning.